Hello and welcome to this faculty in-service on differentiated instruction. My name is Chris Boyle. I want to talk to you a little bit about the benefits of differentiated instruction and some of the supporting theories behind that. The whole idea is that we're trying to move away from teaching some theoretical average student. We want to look at what all students need from the beginning of the lesson and try to make accommodations as they need them and as necessary. The idea is we're taking a look at the lesson and going from the bottom up. We're not retrofitting anything. Students need to learn with the teacher having a full view of what they need to understand and how their needs can be met. There's an appropriate quote here shown on the screen. Universal design is a process by which a curriculum is purposefully and intentionally designed, and that's kind of what we're trying to bring to our classroom. So the question is, why universal design for learning? We want to figure out what our students are learning, and by that we mean what they're perceiving when the teacher is either in front of the classroom talking or they're working in small groups. What are they perceiving? We want to think about how they're learning, how each individual is learning, meaning how they process the information that's presented to them, whether it's visual, auditory, or some other form, some other medium. And then finally, we want to think about why they're learning, what interests students, and what's going to motivate them to become active learners and lifelong learners. So what are the principles of universal design for learning? There's three main things we want to keep in mind. And all this comes from Whitney's book on universal design for learning. And it's filled with practical ways for teachers to incorporate universal design for learning in their classrooms. We want to keep in mind that there are multiple means of engagement, there are multiple means of representation, and there are multiple means of action or expression. So we'll start with engagement. I think this quote is pretty important. To increase engagement, teachers need to catch students' interests and help them sustain effort, persist towards a goal, and self-regulate their learning behaviors. Teachers need to inspire students and keep them involved through the process. Rapp points out a number of ways to keep students involved in the process. She talks about organization and setting up the room in the right way. She plays around with lighting in her classroom. She found fidget toys help keep students engaged, and even giving them some autonomy or control over things that go on in the classroom by giving them jobs, holding meetings, organizational meetings, and she even found different groupings can help students be more engaged and more involved in the learning process. Multiple means of representation gives students access to new learning and helps give reinforcement. So it's the way that we are communicating the new knowledge or the content to the student. Rapp points out that teachers can use ebooks, they can use note-taking software like Evernote, they can use auditory and visual inputs, and creative presentations can help reinforce the content to students. It also helps students become expert learners, meaning that students can be familiar with multiple ways of receiving information. And then by giving them those different experiences, they can know what works best for them in the long run. Multiple means of action or expression means students are allowed to vary their output. So Rapp found students can use writing supports, they can use bulletin boards are often helpful, even expressing themselves using photo essays, music, drawings can all help students figure out different ways of communicating in a way that is most effective for them. She also emphasizes the importance within multiple means of expression, multiple means of assessment. So students can be tested in a conventional multiple choice test or open-ended essay. They can be evaluated using homework, and they can often even use performance assessment like some sort of project or something like that over a longer period of time. RAP has some very good information, and she sums up differentiated instruction very well, and we can use that to kind of segue into differentiation of instruction. It is the practice of understanding individual students' needs and adjusting instructions to match those needs and maximize student learning. Tomlinson is the expert on differentiated instruction. She says teachers need to be comfortable in the disciplines they teach, flexible in their pedagogical methods, and proficient in knowing their students as individuals. Differentiated instruction encourages teachers to change and adapt. Teachers need to change and adapt the content, their process, and the products that they ask students to produce in their classroom. Once they keep those things in mind, teachers can adjust for people's learning profile, their ability and readiness, and their interest. Content is what the teacher wants the students to learn and the mechanisms that is accomplished. The process is the activities given to the students or designed by the teacher to ensure that the students use the skills, the important skills, necessary to make sense of the essential information in the lesson. Teachers should also think about the products they have students develop and turn in, which are the vehicles through which students demonstrate and extend what they have learned. Teachers want to keep all these things in mind as they're designing the lesson and as they're thinking about those universal design concepts for learning. Teachers should adjust for people's learning profile, ability or readiness, and their interest. When adjusting for a student's learning profile, teachers should think about how each of their students learn on an individual level. It can be shaped by, a student's learning profile can be shaped by their intelligence preferences, their gender, their culture, and their learning style. Teachers should also think about their readiness, the student's entry point relative to a particular understanding or skill. It's relative. Each student is an individual, so a teacher needs to know their students well enough to be able to take these things into account. Finally, a teacher needs to adjust for a student's interest, a child's affinity, curiosity, or passion for a particular topic or skill. Some tips or examples to keep in mind when differentiating. We want to focus on the what, the how, and the why when we're differentiating. An example from my own teaching, I did a lesson on vectors and scalars. You can see the lesson plan here. Students were grouped by relative ability in this case. One group was working on the conceptual aspects of vectors and scalars. One group was working on the arithmetic and procedural practice, so calculating sines and cosines, breaking down vectors into their components. And then I had advanced students working on other things. They were coming up with problems, thinking about other applications of vectors to eventually teach the class and get the class engaged. Each group was working on something that is challenging for them and essential to the understanding of the material. So we didn't have students who didn't yet conceptually understand the reasoning behind using vectors and scalars working on the arithmetic or the procedure of calculating the sines and cosines and the different components of vectors. Instead, we had them focus on, why would this be important? And once that's established, then they can move on and understand the arithmetic and the procedure behind using vectors and the little bit more rote aspects of understanding vectors and scalars. Throughout this whole process, students are socializing in novel ways, so they're interacting with their peers and working through problems in real time, trying to figure things out. It's worth noting that the data show, and the study suggests, that reading and behavior problems cause each other over time, and they're possibly influenced by factors like students comparing each other, comparing myself to someone else. They can be environmental, how they're being brought up, and attention. So when it comes to cutting down on misbehavior in class, I think differentiation can be important and a useful tool and worth the time investment for teachers, even though it is a bit more, it has to be a little bit more dedicated and a little bit more thought at the beginning of the process. So in summary, we want to think about multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression for our students so that the content, process, and product is right for each student. And then we want to adjust for each student's learning profile, readiness, and interest. I appreciate you taking the time to view this talk and hope you got something useful out of it.